there's no evidence that says out there that these learning styles um, have a gain on performance and are embedding learning. So the excerpt from the chapter I've taken, this pervasiveness through the layers of learning from coach educators to coaches is evidenced by a recent survey which found that 89% of coaches in the United Kingdom and Ireland have come across the idea or practice of learning styles, and believed 62% of them believe that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. 2018 that reference is from.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Jenny Coe to the podcast. Jenny has spent 25 years in different sporting roles, from the playground to the podium. Jenny's current role is working as a head of performance and well-being with West Ham women's football team, a role where she is shifting the mindset in women's football to consider the idea of performance through well-being. She also works with organizations and national governing bodies around the world to identify and grow participation and increase retention in the female workforce and the development of their environments. Finally, she is also the co-founder of Impact the Game, a company that supports coaches and athletes in the area of sports psychology and coach development. Impact the Game is an opportunity for all sporting participants to understand the world of sports psychology in an accessible and enjoyable way. In this conversation, we talk about her new book, Myths of Sport Coaching, including deliberate practice, the 10,000-hour rule, and learning styles. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about the resources we offer coaches, just check out the links in the show details or go to cuttingedgecoach.com. Now to my conversation with Jenny Coe. Enjoy the episode. Coach is really excited to welcome Jen Coe to the podcast today. She is the co-author of Myths of Sports Coaching with Dr. Amy Whitehead. And we're going to be talking about some of the 20 myths of sports coaching that they, along with their guest authors, addressed in their new book. Really excited for this conversation. And Jen, I would love if we just started off talking about myths around deliberate practice. Maybe first, what is deliberate practice? And then two, what are some of the myths that are kind of believed in sport and coaching around deliberate practice?
Yeah, absolutely. What a great topic to start with. A juicy one, as I would say. So thinking and talking about deliberate practice, keywords come to mind: effort, rules, adult interaction, usually in the presence of adults. So this highly structured activity with specific tasks that are created to overcome a weakness, if we like to use that word or not, and performance then is carefully monitored to provide cues for ways to improve. So Erickson was behind that definition back in 93 to get people to think about improvements in their performance. That was the explicit goals. And then since then, in a number of different areas, it's been diluted, it's been commercialized, but in essence, a way for a person to get from A to B. And then we have some people talking about intentionality around it, but it's the serious business part of it. And as I said, it's got the effort, the rules, and the adult participation, suggesting that there may be a guide to it. So yeah, that's the deliberate practice side of it. Ed Collin wrote this chapter on his own. It's chapter 1 in the book. And all of the chapters have a QR code. So anybody who does buy it, and you can get it on Amazon, can just scan the QR code. And Ed talks you through some of his research. He's also a practitioner. And he gives you a real good insight into why these myths came about, what has happened over the years where language has been diluted or taken out of context. And if I take an excerpt, Luke, just to get us into the frame of some of this chapter for people who it might be a really relevant topic. He says, the development of expertise is not a linear process. And there is little or no evidence to suggest that anybody has figured out the perfect approach for everybody. However, an understanding of the interrelationship between all facets of performance and a holistic approach to connecting across different disciplines is a good place to start. One thing is for sure, deliberate practice never needed embellishment or sensationalizing, because it's a powerful and enriching just as it was, and it will continue to be. And why I picked that part there was I love the interaction with the word relationship and the idea that it's a coming together, that it's not in isolation. There's a multitude, if you're fortunate enough to be in a sport that has a multidisciplinary team or more than one person supporting it, how can we get all the different perspectives? And actually, it didn't need this particular topic back in the early days of research. It didn't need to be sensationalized to be something, the be all and end all of coaching. So, yeah, very relevant at the moment when I hear a lot of people taking something that they've snapshotted from a webinar and thought, yeah, I'll just take that. But I actually haven't unraveled the how and the next level of the what to bring into my environment.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I guess I'm curious to follow up on that. Like, maybe what are ways in your work that you have seen coaches almost buy into that myth of deliberate practice, or like what does that look like if we're buying into that myth? And you kind of talked about what it could be on the other side with a collaborative approach with people from multiple disciplines impacting
Yeah.
their development. But maybe what does it look like when we are buying into this myth of this rigid, deliberate practice that you talked about at the beginning?
So I think in my role as coach developer over the years, the biggest question, and it may be a familiar one for everybody, is why are you doing what you're doing? So if we take this pattern of behavior that people have adopted where they go through formal qualification, they may have been an athlete themselves, they have an entry point into coaching, they go through formal qualifications, and they're on a journey where their skills, knowledge, and behavior are growing based on who they interact with. So then they get to a point, in some cases, and I was really surprised with actually the amount of coaches that haven't been challenged or supported, and so they've gone for a really long time thinking this is the only way to do it and not that there are multiple ways. So we would talk about why we're doing it. Why would we do repetition without repetition in our practice? What impact does it have if we approach extras in football, so the post training 10, 15 minutes, half an hour that the players would do? What do they look like? Why are we doing those? What's the intention? Who's driving them? We talk about athlete centered. I know we're veering slightly off topic here, but it's all encompassing. How do we understand the bigger picture of why we're doing what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. Just that question, why are we doing what we're doing? Because I think when we take the time to critically evaluate it, we probably will realize there's quite a bit of stuff that I'm doing that I don't think is very valuable to the people that I'm supposed to be developing. Do I really need to be doing X, Y, and Z? Sometimes the answer is no,
Yeah,
or sometimes like we could just do it differently or be much more efficient with it. And
yeah,
yeah, I think that that first topic of deliberate practice kind of segues well into another myth that you guys address in the book, the 10,000 hours myth. Again, can you just, what is this 10,000 hours rule or myth? And then, yeah, how does it usually express itself in our coaching and what should we be considering with it?
yeah. So chapter 9 it's titled "Myths: 10,000 Hours, Short-Term Gains or Long-Term Pain." Jody McGowan, Simon Walters, and Chris Watman put this chapter together. It's a really familiar term. It's been again from Erickson's work, which I'll talk about the research in a second, through Malcolm Gladwell's books into different commercial pockets where people thought, if I want my child to get from here to there, or I want myself to get to from A to B in my goal, I need to put 10,000 hours in and then I'll be deemed an expert in this area. So the research started in the world of music, so pianists and violinists were monitored over a long period of time in isolated practice. And it came back with this label that after I think it was 7,000 or in around the 7,000 mark, we had people who were labeled expert, and then people who'd not functioned or operated or practiced in isolation in around the 3,000 hour mark were deemed not to be experts. Now that's a hack on the quick summary of it there. But essentially, what we did then, we tried to copy and paste this and said, oh, okay, really short summary. I need to get my child, or I need to do 10,000 hours, and then I'll have nailed it. I'll be an expert. And, a lot of the work that Bronfenbrenner did was talking about the environment over years. And that's something that I try to implement in my West Ham role that I have, is that if people are in isolation, they're never really out of the environment that they're in. The environment they have, the people in the environment, the interactions, they're all playing a part. So I think what we're looking at here is the understanding that, yes, we put our years and our time and our hours in, but we're not focused on the outcome driven by 10,000 hours. That the long-term pain can mean, in the chapter here, can mean that people are put through really severe regimented routines and excessive amount of training, and the long-term pain could be debilitating to the physical development or mental, emotional development of the athlete, of the person. So some serious considerations there. For a short-term gain, I see in the UK anyway quite a bit of under five elite, under nine elite, and you're kind of going, whoa, hang on a minute, slow down. So we might have and I worked in, I think it was probably 50 schools, primary schools across London, over my early venture to the UK. And it was football mad or soccer mad. And I had kids in all these different primary schools wearing all the representative fan jerseys, and they were on this academy and that academy. And they're thinking, aspirationally, I'm going to be this big person, this David Beckham. And you kind of go, whoa, you're in a massive pool. NBA is the same. When you look, obviously my sport being basketball, when I look at the volume, the competitiveness, the intensity behind it. So we want to just look at how we can understand what the message is in the early research around putting time and practice, looking at the holistic development of the human being as opposed to the isolation, the enjoyment and the sustainability of doing something, and investing time beyond your goals, so that there isn't this massive drop if this certain goal isn't attained, that you can either try again or you can go a different avenue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's so many good things in there. And yeah, what I'm hearing you saying in that myth is that we have believed, and yeah, you said it in the UK and definitely in the US as well, that it's similar to the myth of the Head Start, that like, okay, we need to get kids in sport as soon as possible to get them to this 10,000 hours mark where they'll be an expert, or they'll be at a high enough level in their sport to go on to college or professional or whatever it may be. And yeah, the reality is, like, it's not as clean as that. It's not like, oh, once you hit this mark, you'll be an expert, especially in the context of uh, like group invasion games or group sports, right? Like even so much different than an individual sport like golf or tennis. Like it's a totally different thing when you play a sport as a part of a team together, because now there's the interaction of you with all the other people. So it's like you spent 10,000 hours working on your game individually and you play basketball or soccer, like you might still be terrible at the game because you're not good at the interaction of all the other players, right? So I think that's an important thing to consider too. It's like, and like you said, you see these 5U elite and 9U elite, and then they're all doing their individual private train, and it's like, um, again, like your kid's doing individual training for soccer or basketball at 9, like maybe there's a little value there, but not near what you think there is, right?
Yeah,
Like, and
absolutely. Yeah,
just like, yeah, each kid's path is different. There's so many factors. It's not just like, hey, you get 10,000 hours in and you're going pro, right? And
yeah,
yeah, I think that's important for, yeah, us to understand as coaches, so that hopefully we can communicate that to the stakeholders, to the parents that we're leading. And then also, like, if we have kids, like, let's not buy into the myth that it's like they must do more, 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 more. Because you said it too, the long term impact of trying to get kids to get to this 10,000 hour mark, whatever that is. Uh, yeah, it burns them out, right? And the impacts on their mental, emotional well being. I think about myself in high school, I was really fortunate. I think my parents like unknowingly just handled my sporting experience with a lot of wisdom. Like it was really smart. They were like, "Hey, like you play what you want, but our one rule is you just play one sport a season. You can't do multiple at the same time, but you can play as many sports as you want during different seasons." So I grew up like different sport every season, but I had some friends that like they were deep into soccer academies in the US, and by the time they were a junior in high school, they were just so done. Multiple, like they were good enough to go play in college, but they had no desire to because it had just been forced upon them and it become so all consuming. And yeah, I just think that that's yeah, such an important myth to dispel that hey, it's not just this cut and clean, get 10,000 hours in and you'll be great at it. Yeah, especially in group sports, team games. Yeah, it's crazy to
Yeah,
think it.
it is. And the problem is that in on a real surface level, if people think so, my colleague, one of my colleagues in our company at Impact the Game, has been over in North America doing some sports psychology workshops and stuff. And he rang me the other day and he was like, "Do you know that I've just spoke to somebody whose kids are in CrossFit, spending almost $150 to $200 a month?" And I was like, "What?" With the intention that this will supplement their sporting career. I'm like, "Oh my God, hold the phone. What?" So we're in a position where, on surface, let me try and unturn all these rocks and stones and pebbles for my kids that I love so much to get to whatever level that I want them or they want them to get to. And actually, we're trying to get to a point where, in some sports, if they're run right and they're managed right, they'll say, "You know what, 12's okay, 15's okay." They can specialize. I know there's some sports that will look for early specialization, but there's some sports from a team perspective go, "You know what, go and try other sports. Pick up some decision making cues from other place, other sports. Have a go at this sport and that sport. See what skill set you're gathering. See what leadership skills you're gathering. Have a sport that you're interested or dominate, kind of as an enjoyment and a physical and maybe the success is a win, so it's a little hook, but have some other sports and some other interests so that you're the whole person's developing, because that's the longevity part there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another great point. The next myth I want to talk about, and this is probably the one I'm the most excited to and this is probably the one I'm the most excited to talk about, is learning styles. My undergraduate degree is in special education. I have a master's in education as well. I'm a classroom teacher and coach, and it is just mind blowing how many people believe in learning styles still. And
Still.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, still, ever, yeah, like people in education, they're like, yeah, what's their learning style? I'm like, whoa, we know. Okay, yeah. So that's that's me. Obviously, I want to talk about it. First of
Yeah.
all, let's define the myth. What talk about the myth of learning styles, why it's a myth, and then how is it relevant to sports coaches?
Okay, so chapter 6, learning styles in sports education. Anna Stoddard wrote this chapter on her own, absolutely exquisite, in the layout of the chapter, the practical implications, the kind of underpinning theory, and as she quoted from somebody else, because she won't take claim to this zombie myth that is still lingering. So what we have is the idea, um, back in the heyday, and I too was a victim of learning styles going back to do my master's about 12 years ago. And what we had was a couple of different researchers over time and building on each other's work to design an inventory for people to say, hey, people learn in one of these four ways. So they're auditory, visual, kinesthetic, and um, reading. So they get a chance then to go and do a little inventory and get the results, and then they get this, whoa, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I got to go and do things, and then I get it. And then it developed to people doing it with their athletes. So you had people going out giving, say, with a basketball team, giving out 15 inventories, getting it back and seeing that Jenny over there, she's auditory. So I got to make sure that, I really explain this nice and clear and bullet points so she's got it. But I got to write it down on the whiteboard. And then I've got to go through and put somebody in the mix of running through a play so they get it. So while the initial premise, again, was really good to get coaches thinking about the ways people learn, what we had then was another chance for commercializing. So people had fancy reports, and then they had a piece of paper that they could say, I know this, and really narrowing down something. When Anna explores in her chapter, there's a multitude of different ways that people can learn, and we don't have to be rigid. And also, we're not just narrowing it down to one. So, the detrimental part of this, because some people have argued and kicked back and said, yeah, but what if a coach says, I actually find this really useful because I get to understand how that person learns. Nothing wrong with diving into the person and knowing them, asking questions, absolutely fantastic. But what we got to realize is that I'm not just kinesthetic in the way I learn. I'm going to want to listen to a podcast as I'm walking and build on an experience that I've had or a feeling of something. Or I'm going to get my pen and piece of paper and I'm going to reflect by writing down. Jennifer Moon does a lot of work on reflection and writing down 2 or 3 times, getting to different levels of reflection. So there's loads of value in different ways of learning. And that's what Anna wrote in the chapter here really gets us to think, and hopefully gets coach educators, coaches, organizations, governing bodies to realize that there's no evidence that says out there that these learning styles um, have a gain on performance and are embedding learning. So the excerpt from the chapter I've taken, this pervasiveness through the layers of learning from coach educators to coaches is evidenced by a recent survey which found that 89% of coaches in the United Kingdom and Ireland have come across the idea or practice of learning styles, and believed 62% of them believe that individuals learn better when they receive information in their preferred learning style. 2018 that reference is from. So we're still very, new in the 2018. Those percentages are really high. She also continues, coaches reported using learning styles frequently in their practice, with the majority, 57%, coming across the idea on core coaching courses delivered by their sports organisation. So what we want to have, and we've faced it, we do at the end of each month, the authors have been unreal offering their time. Every Wednesday, the last Wednesday of every month, we pick a chapter and the author gives up an hour of their time to dive into the chapter. So Anna was the first one, and I can give your listeners a link to that. It's free again for people to dive into it. But what was really interesting, Luke, is on that call or on that webinar, some people who were present in the chat room were telling us that they did their level 2, level 3 recently, and it was still in the curriculum. And so what we wanted from this chapter was to completely demystify this idea that people have a preferred learning style that is the only way that they learn. Yes, they might have a preferred way of engaging with learning, but it doesn't mean it's the only way, and it doesn't mean that coaches should latch on to that in their delivery. So I'll pause there for a sec because there's lots in that, but I do see where people would argue back. I do see that people could say, well, it's enlightened me to more than one way of coaching, which has been verbal for a really long time. And in basketball, the odd coaching board that's flung across the room when people don't execute a play. So what we want to do is try and understand the people in front of us. Who are they? What are their needs? What's my job as a coach? How can I be more athlete centered to get to a point where I realize what learning is on the whole?
Yeah, I, that's so good. Here's a few of my thoughts in kind of response to what you're saying. The first is yes, and the funny thing is those statistics you shared around people exposed to the ideas in coach education or that believe it, that it doesn't shock me at all. And then also, I like that you mentioned, like, if you ask someone what their learning style is, most of them will tell you. They'll be like, "Oh, it's this," and that's fine that people feel that way or like have that preference. Kind of like you said, they might feel like, "Oh, I'm a visual learner." That's fine, but the reality of the research is that there isn't one way that they learn. In fact, like everything that I was taught in my classes was that actually like everyone is a multisensory learner, that we need multiple senses of input. We need to hear it, see it, do it. Like it's not just one. we actually all are multisensory learners. And so in our coaching, yes, we should hit those. Like we should hit all this. We should say it. We should show it to them. Then they should do it. Like, and don't waste your time or their time trying to figure out what their learning style is, because they all we all learn virtually the same way, with exposure to multiple senses and then practice repetitions doing the thing in context. And I think it's so important to highlight what you guys highlight in this chapter. And again, it's like, whoa, this is mind blowing. The top levels of governing bodies, of educators for coaches, we're still pushing this at coaches, and we should stop. It should stop. And there should be a part of, like, learning styles are a myth. That's what we should present on. Here's what you need to know about your instruction. Here's how people actually learn. Here's what the research says. Yeah, because it's just crazy that it became commercialized and became just so widely accepted so quickly. And yeah, and again, like, you try to tell people it's a myth and there will be pushback. I think because in some ways, like, people personally identify with theirs in a little bit of ways. Like, it helps explain them personally, and that's fine that you prefer to, like, look at something. Just know that that's not the only way you learn, or that's really not how people learn in isolation. We don't just learn via one method of input. Yeah. Any follow up thoughts to that?
Yeah, loads. I love listening to you there. We have had already a lot of people in education come back and say this has been a really valuable refresher. This has been a really valuable, as I mentioned earlier, vehicle for conversation where I didn't know what the entry point was with somebody who I've heard mention it. Recently, I'm in a coaching group, multiple coaching groups, and one particular group had a guy speaking the other day about learning styles. So instead of me jumping in there and saying, "Oh, wait, hang on," I private messaged and said, "Hey, did this book recently. Anna's done a great chapter. Would you like to have a read of it?" And then we'd have a pick up conversation. Amazing. And he was able to then take that to his environment, because it's just that little small challenge with a bit of support that people can go, I was only doing it because I've been on this linear path for a while, taken on information, and I haven't been challenged on it. And actually, nobody's really complained on the basketball court, in the pool, so I kind of just went with it. So it's got a ripple effect into how people coach and engage with their athletes as well. That's a thread that's in every chapter in the book anyway. Who are the people in front of you? So we get to a deeper level of understanding. So it's brilliant. There's been some uptake in sport, but I was really excited to see some feedback coming through our social channels from people in education who've gone, yeah, this has been great to spread the word and to remind people and look at what's happening in different classrooms and stuff. So yeah, really cool.
That's fantastic. And I think it's important to highlight, we're not saying you shouldn't get to know your athletes individually. And all of your athletes are different people. And that doesn't mean that they have this individual learning style that you need to discover and teach to. We're all multisensory learners, and let's embrace that and get good at doing those things in our coaching. Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Jenny for joining me. I'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you take a minute to either share a takeaway with us on Twitter or share it with a coaching friend? Those things go a long way in helping us share with more coaches who can then impact more athletes. Thanks for listening to the podcast.